Hi, good morning, everybody. Frank Gray here. Today we continue our journey through the Bible in 5 minutes by taking a tour through the second book of the Bible, Exodus. This book derives its name from the key event recorded in Exodus, the exodus of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt across the Red Sea to freedom in what is today the Sinai Peninsula, where they were free for the first time to worship God as he demanded. Here's the backstory. Joseph, the fourth generation from Abraham, through an act of treachery, was sold into slavery. He was carried into Egypt, and there, through several miraculous acts of favor, Joseph became second in charge of all of Egypt. God gave him a dream where he understood that a famine was going to come over all of the Near East. So Joseph used his authority to order that grain silos be built and filled throughout the land of Egypt. When the famine actually came, there was food enough not just for the Egyptians, but for all the people in the surrounding nations around Egypt. So people came from all of the adjoining countries, including the family that Joseph had left behind in Palestine. When they learned that their brother Joseph was second in charge of all of Egypt, Joseph's father, brothers, and all of their families, 70 people in all, moved to Egypt. There they were treated generously and given cattle and land. They prospered and multiplied over several centuries until those 70 people were 2 million strong. But that's when things changed. A new Pharaoh rose up in Egypt who was very fearful of such a large immigrant population within his borders. He was concerned that if the enemies of Egypt attacked them, the Israelites would rise up from within to join his enemies, a fifth column that could take Egypt down. So he took action, ordering that the Israelites be enslaved, all 2 million of them, and put to work building bricks to build the cities and other civic projects of Egypt. The Israelites were treated terribly. They cried out to God for deliverance, and God heard their prayers. He raised up one of their own, an Israelite by the name of Moses. He spoke to him from a burning bush, saying that he had heard the prayers of his people and that he was going to use Moses as their deliverer. He told Moses to go back and to tell the Israelites that God had heard their prayers and that he was going to deliver them. And then he was to go to Pharaoh and tell him God's words, "Let my people go." Well, as you might expect, when Moses heard these words from God, he trembled. He was terrified. How could he go back to his own people with such a bold promise or make such an audacious demand of Pharaoh, ruler of all Egypt, the most powerful nation in the world at that time? He said to God, "God, when I go back, who am I going to say is sending me with this promise and this demand?" It was a legitimate question because the Egyptians worshipped many gods. Which of those gods was demanding that the Israelites be free? When God answered Moses' question with some of the most majestic and commanding words found in all of Scripture, God established the theme for the entire book of Exodus. He said to Moses, "Yahweh is sending you." Now, the word Yahweh is translated in our Bibles today as I am. I am sending you. That's because that is the literal meaning of the word. But the Egyptians and the Israelites both understood that Yahweh meant far more than just the literal meaning. They understood that God was saying, "I am the God who is actively present. I am here. I am there. I'm acting on behalf of my people and my holy purposes." Now, if you're on God's side, that's great news. But if you are opposed to the purposes of God, that is the worst news ever. Well, Moses carried that message back to his people and to Pharaoh. And we see that message. We see the Yahweh principle. We see God actively present in all the events that occur throughout the rest of the book of Exodus. God was actively present when he overthrew the so-called gods of Egypt by sending 9 plagues, each one specifically targeted against one of Egypt's gods. God was actively present with his people. When he led the Israelites out of Egypt, they came to the Red Sea. Their way was blocked, and God miraculously parted the Red Sea so that his people could go through on dry ground. When they got to the Sinai Peninsula, the desert, the wilderness, and there was not enough food or water for 2 million people, God miraculously provided meat, bread, and water for all those people during all the years of their wilderness wanderings. At Mount Sinai, God was actively present in the giving of the 10 Commandments so that his people would understand that they worshiped a holy and righteous God, a God unlike any of the gods they had been exposed to in Egypt. And most importantly, God showed himself as actively present for his people when he ordered that a tabernacle, a tent, be built and placed right in the middle of the camp of the Israelites. In that tabernacle, God would actively display his presence so that his people would never doubt by day or night that their God was with them and for them. The last verses of the book of Exodus say this: the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. The cloud of his presence was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, so that the Israelites in all of their travels would see God with them. The good news is that God is still with us today, still actively present for and with his people. Yes, the original tabernacle is long gone, but today there is a new tabernacle, a living tabernacle. The New Testament in the book of John, the 1st chapter, verse 14, says this about Jesus, the Son of God. It says, the Word, Jesus, became flesh. He became one of us and tabernacled among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. My prayer for every one of you is that God will be actively present in your life today, that through his living tabernacle, his only Son, Jesus, your life will be filled with that very same glory, grace, and truth. God bless you.